I suppose we've had a significant, a seismic shift, if you like, in terms of the oversight, even though it's still a self-certification role. The level of inspection now has increased significantly in order to ensure a kind of a proving, if you like, of regulation compliance. And that's been a big learning curve for not just our profession, but also for the industry itself and contractors, and in particular subcontractors and smaller subcontractors are, I think, struggling a little bit with the demands that are being placed upon them in terms of the compliance with those regulations and the level of inspection and the level of oversight that's being provided.
I don't think there's too many regulations. I think we can still work within, there's still opportunity for variety and creativity within what we have. I think a degree of regulation is really important, or else you see quality, particularly in housing, you see it drop dramatically, as might have happened previously in the UK. So I think we do need regulations to keep things at an appropriate level of quality.
For the architect designer, we were always required to design to the building regulations. The current regime forces people to actually have evidence that they have designed and have technically checked that they meet the regs. And particularly with the environmental changes, the detail and the technicality that you've got to go through, it is more challenging.
They're increasing the standard of buildings that we produce, and I think that can only be a good thing. I mean, there's the whole thing of BCAR. I've no issue with that at all. I'm really for anything that lifts the standard and, you know, produces a better building at the end of the day.
Our approach to the building regulations is that they always existed. What has really changed is the rigour of the implementation of them. And we don't have any difficulty in principle with that process. However, I would have thought of the Northern Ireland model of having a good public sector sort of building regulation authority would probably have been a better format.
The guidance documents that we have are guidance documents, and there are too many people who are taking that as the letter of the law and not listening to interpretations that would be equally compliant, but might be a slightly different way of looking at things.
I'm involved with a small group of architects that meet at a regular basis in Galway, and I felt that we're all independently setting up systems, and it just felt a little bit inefficient in how that was managed and how that was introduced, and it could probably be made easier for practices maybe, because there's huge variation in people's approaches and the different practices approaches. So it just took quite a while for some sort of consensus to come about as to what, and it's still a wee bit grey as to what is a reasonable level of service and a reasonable way to implement the building control regulation changes.
Some of the regulations you'll have to question actually. Some of the, it's almost like it's becoming oversafe. When you compare what we've got here to the regulations that are generally on the continent, I think some of it is actually making it unsafe. It's almost over regulated. But that's what it is. This will all wash out eventually. I mean, it's probably been tried and tested on the ground. What it's doing is it's adding to the cost of building significantly. Contractors tell us that it's adding to the cost of housing, it's adding to the cost of commercial buildings. But I think it gradually, once it goes through the system, and gradually they should be changed. These regulations should be reviewed on an ongoing basis. Nothing is ever perfect when it's done for the first time, and I believe there should be a process there where these regulations can be modified and changed to suit the feedback from the industry and from the environment as people use the buildings.
There's no doubt we're head and shoulders over a lot of Europe on health and safety. We're head and shoulders over some major parts of Europe on disability access and universal access. And we've embraced that in a way that many of the larger economies haven't.
Numerically, we're up, from Passive House perspectives, we're up there with the Germans, numerically, as how many certified Passive House designers we have in the country. That's filtering through the industry. So, I mean, we're proud to see that what's being delivered is ticking those boxes now.
Like having worked in Spain, but previously I thought it was a bit more lenient, but also I think the architect was also, had a lot more knowledge in structural engineering and quantity surveying, and they were had control over those three areas a lot more than they would in Ireland, and it's kind of in some ways I wish we had a bit more control in these areas.
You know, in a sense, you know, there can be some creative solutions around the problems, shall we say, of building regulations. And it's often when something exerts itself significantly that as an architect you really have to find something, you know, that is both a kind of a clever or tactical and subtle response to those demands. So in a sense it becomes a kind of a different type of, shall I say, creative intelligence to solve something if building regulations in some instances are seen as a problem.
Everything's a reactionary, you know, whether it be Stardust and fire regs or what's happening in Grenfell, or, you know, you're going to get a reaction. And they'll probably come hard down on say, the fire regs now, for instance, are going to be looked at. The thermal regs have become quite advanced. The method and how they're assessed isn't that advanced, say, from a legislative perspective. But that said, it is making people think, thinking about things that they never thought about before.